First thing to say is thank you very much for joining us for this webinar on the AIC Sustainable Commodities Scheme. This is the third webinar we've held. We've held two webinar for AIC members and assurance participants, and this webinar is, I guess, targeted at stakeholders or those who have got an interest or an engagement in the commodity supply chain, and there are a number of AIC member businesses who have also joined for this event. So the content of what we're going to deliver is pretty much aligned certainly in terms of the scheme structure and the certification process is exactly as we have delivered to in our members' webinars. We have added some content for this around scheme governance and scheme rules, because we felt that was something that yourselves as important stakeholders in the supply chain would have an understanding of. So in terms of availability of presentation, we are recording this webinar, and we will share after the webinar A, the recording, and B, the presentation. So no need to be scribbling away whilst we're speaking. We asked at the point that you registered for the webinar for any questions. We've got a few already in the bag that we will address or seek to address at the end of the presentation. Obviously, if you do have questions that arise during the course of the webinar, please put those into the Q&A for the webinar, and again we'll seek to address those at the end. So just in terms of introductions, I'm James McCulloch, head of the feed sector here at AIC, and sort of look after the sort of policy aspects, and have been closely engaged in a lot of discussions around sustainable sourcing of commodities that are placed in feed, and so yeah, pleased to be involved in helping develop this scheme. I'll hand over to Sue just to introduce herself.
Yes, I'm Sue Whittington, Technical Manager here at AIC, and I've been responsible for developing the scheme and the scheme standards along with the working group.
Thank you, Sue, and Marie, if you could just introduce yourself as well.
Good morning. Yes, my name's Marie Keys. I'm the Certification Scheme Manager for Intertek SAI Global, and I'm responsible for the audit delivery and certification.
Great, thanks very much. So just in terms of running through the programme for the webinar, the first point in terms of competition law compliance, we put it on the screen, and again, any of you who've attended AIC meetings or webinars will be familiar with the requirements of competition law compliance, but we just want to draw it to your attention. I mean, on the grounds that we're presenting here, I don't think anything we say should contravene competition law compliance, but just be aware if you are putting questions in the chat, particularly around perhaps cost implications of sourcing commodities provenance. Clearly, that's not an area that we can get involved in discussing. So please be conscious of that should you be asking questions or making any comments in the Q&A or the chat. We're going to run through the background of why we developed the scheme, and then Sue will cover off governance and scheme rules, scheme structure, standards and requirements, and then Marie will cover the certification aspects. I would say that Sue has unfortunately developed a bit of a chest infection in the last couple of days, and so has dutifully arrived to help deliver this webinar. But she's not feeling or perhaps sounding her absolute best. So bear with us if you can. But let's move straight into the content. In terms of developing a commodity scheme, we've been engaged in considering commodity scheme and standards or deforestation standards within a scheme for a number of years. And I guess there are two main drivers behind that. The first would be the obvious one of regulatory requirements coming through the system in terms of UK FRC, which was initially proposed within the Environment Act, but as we're aware, has not been taken further as far as secondary legislation is concerned. And then the proposal has been put together in the European Union on EUDR, and clearly that has been the main focus for the development of the standards that we're going to present today. But I think that the other major impetus, which is again why we wanted to hold a stakeholder a webinar to discuss the scheme, has been obviously in response to market requirements and market demands, and particularly initiatives such as the UK Soil Manifesto. And we as AIC and various groups that have been working on the scheme and standards have engaged on a very frequent and a proactive basis with UK Soil Manifesto signatories and their representatives, be that Effica, who I know are on the call today, Retail Soy Group, etc. And we've sought to be to develop a scheme and some modules within the scheme which meets the requirements of the whole supply chain. It's an easy thing to say that, and it's a less easy thing to deliver. But clearly, the regulatory requirement plus the requirements of the supply chain has really helped shape the scheme and the modules that we're going to present. And I think the other thing to say is that we're well aware that in the absence of, say, a single scheme across different commodities, there is an obvious requirement from many of you on this call to set your own requirements and ask your suppliers to meet those requirements with reporting activity and so forth. And our thinking was that if we could try and simplify the asks of particularly producers, i.e. livestock farmers, and their feed suppliers with a single scheme, then that might help A, with compliance, and B, might help reduce the burden on certain parts of the supply chain in terms of complying with requirements. So I think we are pleased that we've taken a whole supply chain engagement in terms of developing the scheme and the standards within the scheme, and we'll obviously run through the details of where we are and welcome your feedback on that. I would say that I'm hoping that all of you who were given the chance to consult on the development of the schemes had done so. We had some very good feedback from a wide group of organisations on our consultation. So I think that we're confident that we're not going to deliver any great surprises in terms of what we've developed to today. So in terms of the scheme, effectively, there are again links available to the full detail of the scheme for those who want to review the scheme in its entirety. But we've split the two modules within the scheme into two sections. So in other words, module 1, which is for participants to demonstrate alignment with EUDR from origin to UK. So that basically means from supply farms in origin countries to arrival in the UK. And module 2 is there for feed mill operators in the UK to demonstrate that they operate a deforestation-free chain of custody for the in-scope commodities used within the in the feed industry. So I think that the reason we've set it out as such, and Sue will explain in more detail, is really to highlight that material coming into the UK, the scheme and the auditors for the scheme will require Module 1 participants to demonstrate that those materials are aligned with the requirements of EUDR. What we're saying in Module 2 is that feed mill operators who will be sourcing some of that EUDR aligned material will also potentially be sourcing material which is not EUDR aligned. So we're operating a mass balance principle at UK feed mill operators on the grounds that our feed industry operate with a single soy bin. They are trying to meet the requirements of their customers, which are different. So they'll have some customers who are requiring that they can demonstrate that they have got EUDR aligned material in their feeds, and others that are saying we're happy with any origin soya. The scheme enables or requires those feed mill participants to demonstrate that they've got control of that mass balance of compliant and non-compliant material coming into and leaving their feed mills. So Sue will explain that in more detail, but I think it's the sort of the base principle. And again, it's a base principle in terms of accepting mass balance at the feed mill level, which is meets the requirements, admittedly on an interim basis, of Soy Manifesto signatories, recognising that the Soy Manifesto signatories clearly remain wedded to the principle of deforestation and conversion-free soya. It's effectively we're saying that this scheme is, and it's been described as a useful stepping stone towards meeting that requirement, which I guess is another way of saying we recognise it doesn't meet fully the stated aims of the UK Soy Manifesto, but we know that as an interim step, it meets much of those requirements. So just in terms of where we are with EUDR and the development of the scheme and so forth, I think most of you will be fully aware of where EUDR sits on the grounds that we are in this period of a second period of delay in the implementation with the 30th of December 26 as the application date for large and medium-sized operators, and 30th of June 27 for small and micro operators. We're only 15 days away from an important line in the sand as far as UDR is concerned, which is the 30th of April review date. So meaning that any review or revision of or proposed revisions to EUDR as a regulation have to be tabled by the 30th of April. Again, many of you on the call will be following the discussions and the debate and the sort of lobbying activity that might be going on in Brussels around this. Our feedback is that despite all of the noise that remains around EUDR, we're told that the Commission is not minded to consider many wholesale changes or amendments to the regulation. There may be some amendments to the annex. We understand that leather may be removed from the annex. Instant coffee might be added. The feed industry might see that as an opportunity to seek the removal of palm kernel expeller, which again we've discussed before as a I guess a challenging area for us in terms of EUDR compliance. And again, we're not going to dwell on whether the use of PK in the feed industry is the driver for deforestation. We would say that it isn't, but nonetheless, I think that the message we're getting currently anyway from the Commission is that do not expect any major changes or amendments. I think perhaps largely covered this in terms of the way that we set up the the modules within the in the scheme. But clearly, if we're dealing with module 1, which is for from origin to point of entry in the UK, that is applicable for shippers, importers, and exporters to demonstrate alignment with the requirements of EUDR. And then module 2 is applicable for the compound feed manufacturer and feed ingredient suppliers. So and it's important. Again, something that we sort of took on board in the consultation exercise, that it's very important for those of you in other parts of the supply chain to be able to understand which businesses are participants, be they under module 1 or in module 2. So we just thought that we would just explain how you as engaged in the supply chain would actually be able to find out who or which businesses are participants in which part of the scheme. So I'll just pass over to Sue to explain the assurance checker.
Yeah, thank you, James. Yes, as part of the AIC website, within the trade assurance section, we have a trade assurance checker, which currently lists all of the certified businesses for the schemes that we manage. So that's UFAS, FEMAS, TASC, FIAS. I will come into the details of those a little bit later, but we just wanted to show you where you can find this checker. You can search within the checker by company name, by postcode, and if you move on to the next one, James, here's an example of what you will see once you've entered a company's details. It will list the company, it will detail their certification status, and obviously on the right hand side there you can see the schemes and sub-schemes that are listed and the scheme status. Now within Sustainable Commodities Scheme, we will be bringing this scheme into the database to be able to feed into the assurance checker with the information supplied by the certification body. And so as you can see on there, we've got an example here of 4 farmers, and obviously you've got the address, certification status, the scope listed there, which for Sustainable Commodities will list the products within the scope of certification. scheme, sub-scheme and certificate expiry date. And there is a link on the slide which will take you to that assurance checker.
And just to be clear, that link is available to all. It's not behind a members paywall.
Yeah, it's publicly available. You will need to log into the website, but it is publicly available. So just wanted to touch on the scheme governance. Obviously, AIC does manage a number of assurance schemes on behalf of the agri-supply industries. Now, these are UFAS, which is for compound feed manufacturing, FEMAS for feed ingredients, TASK for cereal and grain management, FIAS for fertiliser security, ESTA, which has requirements for seed treatment, and RED, which is the EU scheme for biofuels. So all of the schemes have been developed in consultation with members and other stakeholders, and we follow the same aims, and we've taken the same structure for the Sustainable Commodities Scheme. So they were developed mainly around feed and food safety initially, in response to a number of incidents that happened in the 1990s and 2000s, which some people will remember, BSE, salmonella, etc. And it was to minimise the risks of these type of incidents happening again, provide businesses with a way of demonstrating due diligence in meeting legislative requirements, and to meet customer requirements, and to also develop uniform standards that applied across the industry. Next one, James. This slide just shows how the different schemes fit in with the food chain supply chain. And as you can see there, we have over 4,000 participants within the UK, Ireland and overseas. And they're all independently audited, and to all the certification bodies that certify are accredited to ISO 17065, which is the product certification standard accredited by UCAS. And this shows that they're ensuring that they comply with legal requirements and gives them a way of demonstrating due diligence. And obviously, for anybody that wants to find out more about any of the assurance schemes, the links are there on this slide. And looking at the way the schemes are governed, each of the schemes have a working group which is made up of industry experts and scheme participant representatives and stakeholders. And each of the working groups have an independent chairman, and this group works to develop the schemes, and the schemes are reviewed every 3 years, and there are subgroups for each of the schemes where the technical experts, who are a subset of the working groups, will review those standards and look at what's currently happening in industry and legislation, and the technical content will be reviewed. And along with that, any associated technical documents associated with the schemes. So those review groups feed into the working groups. Also associated with that is another subgroup which is a joint scheme development group where representatives from each of the schemes meet to ensure that where requirements need to be aligned, then they're aligned across each of those schemes. So each of those working groups then report into our Feed and Food Safety Steering Group, which is the AIC Services Group, which steers the work that we do. And ultimately, that group then reports to the AIC Services Board. Now, for all of the schemes, certification is delivered by independent certification bodies. And obviously, as I've explained already, that they are accredited to ISO 17065 for product certification for the feed and food safety schemes. And the certification body is selected through a transparent tender process, and this is the same process that has been followed for the Sustainable Commodities Scheme. Now, initially, the Sustainable Commodities Scheme will not be accredited, but once the scheme standards are fully established and the scheme trials have been completed, then we will be looking to follow the same process for accreditation for the scheme. Should we move on to the next one, James? So just moving on to the scheme rules. There's a lot of words on this slide, but basically the scope for certification, it's commodity agnostic, and the individual participant is able to identify those commodities that they wish to have included within their scope of certification. Move on to the next one. And it is a prerequisite for Sustainable Commodities Scheme that all raw materials and feeds are also certified under a food and feed safety scheme recognised by AIC. Now, this can be one of the AIC schemes, which is obviously UFAS, FEMAS and TASK, or it can be through one of the certification systems for which we have mutual recognition, which is another part of the scheme governance. We have mutual recognition with a number of EU feed safety schemes. And any claims that are associated with certification, that claims can only be made in relation to those products that are included within the scope of the certificate. And obviously, just going back to the member checker, I don't know about going back on the slide. Just going back to the member checker. Obviously, the
that one, wasn't it?
yeah,
Sorry.
that the feed and food safety schemes are listed there. So if anybody wants to check status on feed and food safety, they can do that through the same system. So there are a number of different audits within the scheme. If a participant would like a pre-assessment, which is voluntary, to help participant align their how they meet the requirements of the particular module, then that is an option for them. But to say that's not a requirement. Obviously, initially, once they've applied, they will have an initial audit, which will cover all the requirements within the relevant module. Then following on from that, on an annual basis, they will have an annual surveillance audit. And within all of our schemes, so we have a transparent system to demonstrate the integrity of the scheme and make sure it's robust. We have a programme of short notice audits, which is an audit carried out at least once during the 3-year certificate period, and that's with 24 hours notice. And there is also the option for unannounced audits and extra immediate audits, where we may become aware that there may be an issue with a particular participant. So that would be an immediate check on that audit. And there also is the option for, where necessary, where a supplier into a participant may be supplying particular services or raw materials, then this may require an audit also. So during that audit, there are all of the requirements within the standard are required to be complied with. There are different levels of non-conformance against those standards. Critical where there is a obviously gross failing, major where it is a failure to meet the requirement, or on surveillance audits, a reoccurrence of a minor non-compliance, and minor, which is a partial failure or maybe a failure within one particular area. And depending on what the non-conformances are, then to comply with the requirements to achieve certification, then it may be a requirement to send in documentary evidence, or it may need a re-audit, and obviously the details are listed there, but all of those need to be agreed with the certification body within those timescales detailed on the screen. If you move on to the next one. So looking at the standards, I won't go into the full detail of the standards, but within the modules, they have been structured to mirror the structure of the feed and food safety schemes. For those of you on here who are participants of feed or food safety schemes, then you will be fully aware of obviously the standards and the structure of the scheme standards for each of those. I just wanted to highlight the two sections where the requirements in sustainable commodities is different, and that is section C, which relates to raw materials and feed products and their suppliers. And I'll come on to the details of that. And if you move on to the next one, James, section I, looking at traceability and chain of custody, because obviously chain of custody is important within this standard. So taking each of those modules, module 1 from origin to UK for alignment with EUDR, the main sort of highlights are looking at supply chain mapping and due diligence risk assessment. So it is a requirement that a participant will map their supply chain for the products within their scope of certification and complete a due diligence risk assessment for each of the commodity, for each of their supply chains, to be able to demonstrate that those commodities are produced in alignment with the requirements of EUDR. And obviously that includes a deforestation risk assessment. And obviously associated with that, a requirement for farms have right to use the land, and any new acquisitions or development that may affect local communities, there's free, prior and informed consent. And moving on to the land use and environmental protection, the main point here is obviously the deforestation cut-off date. So this is for legal and illegal deforestation to fit in with the requirements of EUDR, that the cut-off date is the 31st of December 2020, unless it's mentioned in national legislation with an earlier date. And obviously, also in addition to that, any conservation areas, areas around natural bodies of water and those sensitive to erosion are all maintained. Or if some areas had been converted prior to the cut-off date, that these are restored. And obviously, any wetlands, any areas where there are threatened or endangered wildlife, whether that be plants or animals, then habitat is provided to safeguard those, and these are identified on a map. And then on section F, when you're looking at the sales and transmission documentation, in line with EUDR, where geolocation information is required and due diligence statements are required, then that needs to be recorded. So within module 1, the chain of custody models which are acceptable is firstly control mass balance, secondly segregation, thirdly identity preserved. Control mass balance is the terminology used in the latest chain of custody models guidance from ICEAL, which was published last year. And it is a variation of the mass balance chain of custody model, where all the materials going into the system have specific attributes. So basically, it's controlling the product that goes into that mass balance. So it can be certified from source, it may not be certified, but as a minimum requirement, then product needs to meet the requirements of EUDR, so it must be legal and obviously deforestation free. And if it's found that any raw materials or products within the scope of certification are accidentally or intentionally commingled with other products which cannot be proven as to where they have originated from, then with in terms of deforestation free status, then that lot of product would not be within their certification status. And that's just a diagram which demonstrates how that controlled mass balance chain of custody fits in. Obviously, if a participant wants to specify that they have a segregated supply chain, that is also an option, and also identity preserved. But obviously segregation is for certified product only, certified to the Sustainable Commodities Scheme, and identity preservation is separated from production site through the system to the end customer. So the next two slides just demonstrate how this the chain of custody model in terms of control mass balance works. So as you can see in there, you've got consignments where product is certified under a scheme recognised by AIC, and we are in the process of benchmarking certification systems, and they will be published on the website. So there will be a list of recognised schemes for the Sustainable Commodities Scheme. And another consignment which isn't certified at source, but through mapping, documentation, traceability, then it can be demonstrated that it is deforestation free and meets the requirements of EUDR. If you move on to the next one, James. And similarly with this diagram, I mean, these diagrams are all listed within the standard. So if anybody wants to have a closer look, then they are listed within the standards. So moving on to module 2, once product has arrived in the UK. Again, section C, supply chain mapping and due diligence risk assessment is important, and a participant needs to map and document their supply chains again for each commodity within scope of certification and carry out a due diligence risk assessment to demonstrate that all product within their scope is produced in compliance with the module. And that risk assessment includes deforestation risk for each material and its supplier prior to use. So product for participants certified under module 2 should be obtained from participants who are either certified to the Sustainable Commodities Scheme or one that is recognised by AIC. And the traceability and chain of custody models within module 2 is, as James said earlier, to cope with the different range of customers and the one bin scenario within a feed mill. Then it is mass balance, segregation and identity preservation. And again, there's a table which demonstrates how they fit in to the system, and obviously the highlighted ones are the ones that are acceptable within the standard. So looking at it diagrammatically, you have the option to mix consignments, whereas we've got on this example one consignment which is certified back to source, one which is wasn't certified at source but is demonstrably deforestation free, and then a third consignment which could be any source, and they would be mixed in a bin, and any resulting consignments which leave that bin, to fit in with the mass balance, the total amount that could be certified could only be equal to or less than, depending on what any process losses there are which need to be accounted for, the total amount that was put into the bin in terms of consignment A and consignment B. If you move on to the next slide, then we've got some figures that sort of demonstrate that. So as you can see in this example, 4 consignments there of 200 tonnes each. So that makes a total of 800 tonnes. And the tonnage that can be included within the certification, and once again, this needs to be demonstrated through the process within the individual mill. And that would need to be demonstrated, obviously, as part of the audit and certification process, that you've got 3 consignments there: consignment F with 100 tonnes, consignment G of 300 tonnes, and consignment H with 200 tonnes. which is equal to the total amount in consignment A, B and C. And obviously the remaining 200 tonnes cannot be included within the certification because that obviously equates to the 200 tonnes which was from any source in the original mix.
Well, thank you, Sue, and yeah, thanks for taking us through the chain of custody models. Maria, we might come on to you, please, to sort of cover the cover your role as certification body in this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Sue. As mentioned earlier, I am the certification scheme manager for Intertek SAI Global. So first question, I guess, is who are Intertek SAI Global? For the next slide, please. So we are an international assurance, testing, inspection and certification company for products, trade and resources. We have over 44,000 employees. We have over 3,000 auditors and operate in over 130 countries. Next slide, please. As we can see from the slide map, we have an extensive global presence. Our global footprint spans from Canada and the US up there in the top left of the screen, down to Australia and New Zealand down in the bottom right, to name a few, covering our services. Thank you. Next slide, please. So today I'm just going to give you a quick run through the steps to certification that participants will need to take to become certified. So firstly, participants must prepare for the audit, and this can be done by downloading the scheme standards for both Module 1 and or Module 2 from the website, reading through the standards and completing the internal checklist, all of which are available on the AIC website again. Identifying any documentation, including AIC recognised feed safety schemes that may be required for raw materials. And then participants are then required to contact Intertek SAI, where we will send out an application form, which is where we collect a lot of the detail regarding what's required for your certification. Next slide, please. Okay, section 1 here, we've got participants need to complete the application form in full, selecting the modules that they're applying for and the commodities for which the certification is required. Once this is received and accepted, participants will show as applied on the publicly available register or the AIC assurance checker that Sue mentioned earlier. Secondly, the audit is then booked. So in the first instance, this will be the participant's initial audit, and the audit duration will depend very much on the site or sites, including the complexity, number of commodity lines, and any additional sites where applicable that are required within the scope. So we need to be notified of what is required within the certification scope of the participant. Certificate or certified businesses completing Module 2 can opt for the likes of a multi-site certification or single site certification, but all operations will be listed by site for each commodity in the scope. So storage and distribution, or you have other operations happening at a different site. Section 3. At the end of the participant's audit, the auditor does provide them with an audit summary, including any non-conformances that may be raised during the audit. Sue did go through earlier, it's earlier in the slides, showing the timescales required to submit any corrective evidence. And Section 4 there, participants must provide those responses to any non-conformances required within the timescales, whether they be critical, major or minor non-conformances. And we then review any evidence that's sent in. We can request for further evidence if we don't feel what's been sent in is sufficient. And then Section 6 there, the certification decision is made once we're happy with all the information that has been supplied, and a full certificate issued. Obviously, this is for new participants having the full certificate issued, listing the scopes, the commodities, and any registered additional sites for their activities. Their participants' details are then updated on the AIC Assurance Checker, and this will change if there are any difference or changes to the scope. And one of the things that we do require is if there are any changes to the business, that we are notified immediately and not waiting till your next audit to make sure that everything is included as required within the scope of your certification. Next slide, please. So participants are required to renew every year if they wish to continue with their certification. They would be contacted by Intertek SAI prior to the audit anniversary of their initial audit. And we would then request that a renewal form is completed and to notify us of any changes again. So another opportunity there to notify us if anything has changed within the business, and any renewal fees then are paid. Now, the certification is, or the certificate is valid for 3 years, subject to the payment of all the relevant fees and the ongoing compliance with the scheme's requirements, included but not limited to the demonstration of compliance at surveillance audits, short notice, or unannounced audits. Now, participants will be required prior to their audit due date to arrange the surveillance audit, which must take place within the required set time period on the screen there. So that said, we have mentioned earlier on in the presentation short notice audits and unannounced audits. Now, these are a requirement in addition to your annual surveillance audit. So they would be, say, in addition to. So you'd have your annual audits, your surveillance audit, but you may be required for an unannounced, and 1 in 3, a short notice audit. So, and that's just a quick run through the certification process. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you very much, Marie. So just to wrap up and very quickly, so that there's a little bit of time for questions. In terms of benefits, and I think our benefits are here identified not just for participants, but for the, I guess, all actors in the supply chain. Independent verification in terms of a standard which is independently verified. We think that clearly is a benefit and should give confidence to those in the supply chain that it's a robust and credible standard. Transparency we talked about, so it will be relatively simple for people to understand who is a participant and who is not by looking at the assurance checker. I mean, clearly meeting regulatory and market requirements. This has been an area that's of particular interest to those UK operators who might be placing beef on the EU market and have to comply with the EUDR, but indeed others who might be placing other products on the EU market with a feed footprint and may be required by their customers in the EU to demonstrate that the feed that might have been given to animals that have provided those products is compliant with the regulation. So in other words, recognising that there are regulatory requirements, but as well as market requirements in the EU as well. I think the idea of a single certification scheme, hopefully accepted by the whole supply chain, so we can reduce the number of different reporting requirements that might be made on livestock farmers and then get passed up to feed businesses. And then finally, I think the important thing in that we've been trying to build a vehicle in terms of the scheme which can be developed as legislation and market requirements do develop. So we again have discussed and made a commitment to work on a deforestation and conversion-free module within the scheme. We may well also be considering a UK FRC or a forest risk commodity module should that regulation be brought forward. And then other areas such as green labelling. In other words, if there is a requirement, say, for downstream operators for suppliers to put carbon values on feed and therefore to be able to deliver up carbon values for livestock derived products, then if the feed industry is going to be using carbon values, the standard or the scheme could be used to help verify that those values are correct and have been used, using correct methodology and data sources and so forth. So that's rather more to the future, but certainly we think there's some potential for further development of the scheme. So I'll just stop sharing there, and we had a number of questions provided in advance, which we can just quickly cover off, and then deal with others that might have come up during the last sort of 58 minutes or so. So we had a question about would the scheme apply to wheat. I guess we've said that the scheme is could potentially be applied to all commodities. So if there was a requirement to demonstrate that wheat was deforestation free, then the scheme could be used to do that. I mean, clearly, we know that the annexes within EUDR may well be amended at some point. We've discussed maize or it's been discussed previously, whether to extend the scope to maize. So in other words, I think the short answer is yes. That the scheme could be developed to consider other commodities. Clearly, the bar is set as to whether the supplier and user of that wheat could provide the information that is required. But nonetheless, there's no reason why the commodity standard could not include wheat. We had a question around again. Does the standard recognise the importance of covering aspects of conversion, and could we develop the standard further? I guess that because we've aligned initially this with EUDR requirements, we have focused on deforestation. But I think I said at the outset, and I've just said it just now, we do understand that UK Soil Manifesto signatories and others have already made commitments around deforestation and conversion. And certainly, we would be looking to develop further module within the scheme around deforestation and conversion. And for the record, we as AIC are engaged in discussions with the BSI group that is working on a deforestation and conversion standard. So I hope that sort of clears the question. We had a question around will the scheme be recognised by the Agriculture Stewardship Council. We're working on, as Sue was saying, some of the benchmarking aspects of other schemes, and I think that's something that we would need to discuss with the Agriculture Stewardship Council. But we're certainly open to benchmarking and or cross recognition, because it helps build the sort of the community of schemes which meet the standard.
Which is a system that we're using with the European feed safety schemes. So we have mutual recognition with a number of schemes within Europe. So we'll be looking to follow that same process. I think you've answered Rose's first question.
Okay, so just looking at the questions then on the in the Q&A. So the addition of the conversion-free module, I think we've just covered that. Timelines and rollout of the scheme. When can companies apply for it, and when is ACS material likely to become available? I think that's a two-part question, isn't it, Sue?
It is. Yeah.
In terms of you've done additional timelines and rollout.
Yeah, timelines. Currently, we are in process of audit training, and linking the IT systems up between Intertek, SRI Global and ourselves. The application forms are all ready, and the checklists are in process and being uploaded to the data capture system. So we anticipate that from Q3, then applications will be accepted.
And then to answer the second part of the question in terms of availability of material, I know that we've always been at pains to highlight the fact that the existence of the scheme is in itself not a signal in terms of availability of supply. That clearly is down to the market. I mean, we're well aware that a number of important stakeholders who perhaps on the call have already specified the scheme as part of a hierarchy of sourcing requirements, which we think is very welcome, because that does deliver a demand signal. So if we have participants who are then asking suppliers in terms of availability of product that meets the standard, clearly those suppliers will consider what material they have available and presumably the terms upon which that material can be made available. So we have to disassociate the scheme from the market, but recognise that demand signals from businesses such as yourselves need to be, I guess, clear and transparent to help suppliers consider where they are in terms of supplying material. So a bit of a wheezy answer to that one, but clearly we can't get engaged in market discussions. I think the final question I can see here is around the assurance checker showing which modules organisations are part of. I think the answer to that is yes, isn't it?
I mean, well, it will list on the member checker which module somebody is certified to, but I think the question is around, for somebody that is certified to module 2, would their supplier organisations be listed as part of their certification? Well, no, it wouldn't list their suppliers, because obviously that's a commercial arrangement between that feed mill and their suppliers. But obviously, if an individual participant wanted to share that information with a customer, then it would list on the member checker if somebody is certified to module 1 or module 2. But so if I've misunderstood the question, I apologise, but I think it will list which module somebody is certified to, but under one company's certification, it won't list their suppliers. But somebody will be able to obviously double check the certification status of those companies.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. So I know we're a little bit over time. So I guess to wrap up, just to say thank you very much for attending. As I say, we recorded the webinar and we'll make the recording available and this presentation, which has obviously got our contact details here on the final slide. So if you do have further questions which you'd like us to answer, please fire them in, and we'll do our best to respond. So yeah, sorry for running a little bit over time, but thank you for your attendance today, and enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.